Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. We're so happy you joined us again. I'm having a really easy supper tonight. Fred had a coupon and got some great mushrooms, and so we're going to have some mushroom soup. Before we start cooking, I thought I would take a couple of minutes or half a minute to talk a little bit about the philosophy behind cooking from scratch and the philosophy of the American cuisine. I think many folks will say there is no such thing as an American cuisine, an American culture of cooking and eating. I say that's not true. I say that the American cuisine is a mixture that's as diverse as our population, and that what we eat on a regular basis as Americans is our cuisine and is our culture. Each of the separate parts has its own distinctive heritage and culture, but so much of what we eat and what we think of as American actually comes from other heritages. And I think it's good for us occasionally to look at what those are. So tonight I thought I would talk just a little bit about French cuisine. And I think many folks don't realize how deeply French cuisine is entrenched in American eating habits and in our cooking culture. So I just want to mention in passing the sort of basis of French cooking and how it relates to what we eat and what we do. French cooking is based on sauces for the most part. And there are 5 basic, what they call mother sauces. I may not say them right because I actually don't speak French at all. Have a lot of trouble just speaking English properly, so I never learned French. But I do know the sauces. The 5 sauces are bechamel, and that's a white sauce. You probably think of it as gravy. It's flour, fat, and milk mixture made in a certain way. You see me make it all the time. You begin with a roux, and then you add milk. Sauce velouté, which I'm sure I'm not saying right, velouté, which is French for velvet, is a little bit darker sauce. It's made from stock, and then in order to make sauce supreme from that, you add cream. And you think of that, most likely, in your everyday life as what you get out of a can of cream of mushroom soup or cream of celery soup or cream of chicken soup. That's basically sauce supreme. Sauce espagnole is a darker sauce. It's probably what you think of as brown gravy. Hollandaise sauce is an egg-based sauce. It's thickened with eggs. It's one that I don't make. I've never mastered. And so I'm going to refer you to my good friend Judy Strauss, and I'll put a post to her website, a link to her website in the comments of this video. That she is a prolific author, a great chef. Her books are The Charmed Garden and The Charmed Kitchen and many more, and they're available online or at bookstores. Judy has a wonderful hollandaise sauce, and I'll refer you to that. And then the other sauce that is one of the 5 mother sauce is the sauce tomate or tomato, and it's basically it's a thickened tomato sauce, something like you probably think of in a can of Campbell's soup. The reason I mention all of those things is because when you're learning to cook from scratch, or you're going back to cooking from scratch, it's good to know how to make those things that you're depending on from the store. And almost all of the recipes that you have that have a base of sauce that you're using soup for, it's pretty easily made from scratch. So tonight I want to take a mixture of some of those sauce techniques and make cream of mushroom soup from scratch, and sort of urge you to learn to make these from scratch cream soups to enrich your from scratch cooking and to replace some of the things that you now buy. Let's be clear. We also do canning on Debbie's Back Porch. None of these can be canned. They have flour and cream bases. You can make them, though, out of things you have canned. For instance, the sauce velouté is made with chicken broth, and this is my home canned chicken broth. It's a light sauce. Generally, they want you to, it's recommended that you use a lighter broth, chicken, veal, or fish. You can use other broths, but generally you use the darker broths if you're making the Hollandaise sauce. So we're going to move into making this very easy, quick meal. I'm not even going to get off my stool. I do want to mention the noise that you hear in all of my videos that sounds like someone snoring. It's my puppy. He's a very old puppy. I've had him since he was a puppy. His name is Bobby. And like Fred and me, Bobby's getting a little bit older and he makes some funny noises when he gets up and down. And so he wants to stay close. He's always in the floor of the room that I'm in. So when you hear that snoring or you hear that barking, that's Bobby, and we're going to give him just a little slack because he's old and he's low. Okay, sauce velouté. I have little sniffles here today because the handy dandy prep crew is on vacation and I had to do it all myself. So basically you start with a roux, and the basic rules for a roux are that you use equal parts fat, which I prefer butter. Julia Childs said. You don't have to use real butter, but you'll be sorry if you don't. She said that a lot. Equal parts thickener, which can be flour or cornstarch. Fat, which can be butter or oil. Could be bacon grease. For this, I'm using butter. And then for every tablespoonful of butter, tablespoonful of flour, you add about a half cup of liquid. And the liquid you use depends on the results you want. Now that liquid amount can vary based on how thick you want your final results to be. And generally when I'm doing this, I keep some extra broth or milk, whichever one I'm using, to add in case it gets too thick. So we're doing mushroom soup. Now with a sauce velouté, if I'm saying it correctly, I think I am, you would put the roux in now. I'm sorry, you would put the thickener in now. I'm actually going to vary that just a little bit because this is mushroom soup. I want to get some flavors going in here. And I've added some onion that I chopped. That's a half cup of onion. And this is 2 cups of chopped mushrooms. And we're going to let those simmer. I've said I chop things fairly finely when I'm making a sauce or a sauce-based dish. Partly because I think you get more flavor out of vegetables that are finely chopped than you do out of chunks. And part of the success of a soup or a sauce or a gravy is having that flavor infused all through it. So this is our onions and our mushrooms, and I went outside just because I wanted to and got just a touch of 3 herbs, probably a half a tablespoon total. And this is 2 little leaves of basil, a little tiny bit of rosemary, and just a tiny little bit of oregano. And I wash them and chop them finely. And I'm going to let them sizzle here with the vegetables. And then I'm going to come back to you and show you the rest of the soup. We're getting that wonderful smell. And we're getting a sizzle. And you can see that the onions are turning translucent. I'm going to let that cook just another minute. This is that's sealed good. Okay. This is my homemade chicken broth. I mentioned in another video, you can use other broth, but I'm using this because it's coming up on a year old and I want to use it up. So I'm going to measure out 2 cups or a pint of this broth. I may use a little bit more, but I'm going to start with that. If I wasn't clear before, I will be now, and I will post the ingredient recipe. I put 6 tablespoons full of butter, and I have 6 tablespoons full of flour. The vegetables are going to soak up some, so I'll add a little bit more butter. This is not written in stone, but if you start with those measurements, you're going to be very close to right. As I say, the liquid would be a little bit different based on whether or not you want a sauce or a soup. A little bit more liquid in soup, and that's why I'm keeping my broth there. And this is a pretty quick meal. I don't have to get all of this out, but I want to get most of it out. And the aroma is just making my mouth water. Can you smell it? No smell vision here. Okay, we've got this up a little high. I'm cooking on this Cadco burner, which is a new thing for me. I usually cook on a gas stove, but it's easier for me to show you what I'm doing here. We're going to put the flour in kind of slowly. Whoops, I wanted to add the extra butter. That's to make up for the butter that was soaked up by the vegetables. So if you were making the sauce velouté, you wouldn't have this darkness from the mushrooms. It would be a blonde sauce. It would stay light colored. But this is going to be a mushroom soup, so it's a little bit darker. And you want to stir this well. I use, almost always, I use this silicone whisk. I have one that's a little bit bigger, but this one works great. And there seems to be some dispute. I watch lots of cooking videos and cooking shows, and I was taught back in 1964 by Ms. Yarborough in my home ec class that a white sauce, a bechamel, or a velouté, you don't use metal utensils, and you don't make them in a reactive pan. So unless I'm making a dark sauce, I don't use my regular cast iron. This is enamel coated cast iron. Because the reaction of the metals can cause a change in your color. It wouldn't matter so much in this because it's a mushroom soup. So this is fairly thick. And we're going to let it cook a little bit. You always want to let the pasty flavor cook out of it. And it'll soften up and loosen a little bit. I might need to add just a little bit more butter. My vegetables might have soaked up a little more than I intended, and I'm going to. Let me get just a little bit more butter. Okay, I've added another tablespoonful of butter. I want to mix it in well so we don't get lumps. There we go. That's the consistency we're looking for. That's a roux, and if it had not been for the color coming from the mushrooms, this would be a very light colored blonde roux. So now we're going to let, for about a minute, we're going to let it sizzle. If you were making brown gravy, you would let this get dark, and you have to stir it constantly because you want the darkness to come from the browning of the flour. You don't want it to come from scorching. And when you get a dark roux, it gets a wonderful nutty taste from the browning of the thickener. We're not going for a dark color here. Okay, now we're going to add, this is 2 cups of chicken broth. A little bit at a time. Stir, stir. You want no lumps. You're dissolving the roux into the broth. A little more. When we get this all in, remember we've got at least 1 more cup of liquid to add. When we get this all in, we'll let it cook. Get all the broth in, we'll let it cook about 5 minutes. You see it's mixed well. That little dark spot you see is a mushroom, it's not a lump. And I'll come back to you in about 5 minutes. And I'll watch this to make sure we don't have any scorching in the meantime. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes. And I stir, stir, stir. Not the whole time. Every couple of minutes I'd stir it up. And you can see that it's getting thick. And what you have here is a sauce velouté. We're going to turn it into a sauce supreme, which is then cream of mushroom soup. You may want to add a little more salt. I use self-rising flour, which has salt, so mine needs no salt. The sauce actually calls for all-purpose flour, and you'll want a salt and pepper to taste. That's already very good. If you'll see, it's silky. Velouté means velvet in French. And so now, in our little break, I measured out 1 cup of half and half. Sauce supreme calls for heavy cream. I'm using half and half. You can actually use whole milk. I would not use 2% or no need to go for this richness and then water it down. So this is half and half. You can warm this milk if you like. I did not. I let it sit out for about 5 minutes. And we have a good thickness here. It may thicken up a little bit. I'm going to let it simmer for about 5 minutes after I put the mushrooms and onions back in. I'll let some of the liquid drain off. Now this is, as I've said, cream of mushroom. If you had used chicken, it would have been cream of chicken. If you had used celery, it would have been cream of celery. Whatever your favorite soup is to add to recipes, this can be cream of that, whatever that is. I'm going to let this simmer now for about another 5-6 minutes. If it's too thick, we'll add a little more broth. I don't think it's going to be. And I don't know if you can see the creaminess and richness of this soup. I'm going to pour this up for you just a little bit so that you can see the texture that we have. And it's going to be just a little bit thicker when we let it simmer for 5 more minutes. I'll be back. We are back, and I wish there was a way that I could show you on a video the wonderful creamy texture of this soup. If you think Campbell's soup or canned soup of some kind holds some attraction, make this once and you'll no longer think so. This deserves the fine china. Creamy, rich, velvety. And we're going to put just a couple of fresh mushrooms on top as a garnish. And then we're going to serve. Enjoy. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the mother sauces. I want to remind you to go to the website, The Charmed Kitchen, for instructions on making Hollandaise sauce. In future videos, I will spend more time discussing bechamel, espagnole, and sauce tomate. And I hope you join us for that. Thanks.